The Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
Wolves Wired podcast. We're without our trusty producer Tom Schreier once again. He's out of town, so I'm behind the producer table. So if this all sounds terrible, blame Tom for going out of town. I don't know,
but I think we'll make it work.
Yeah, I think we will. Tim Fakeless here with Dane Moore. David Naylor's in Kansas City for zone coverage covering Minnesota United at Sporting KC. I know we got to get out of here quickly so Dane can go home and watch the replay of that.
I'm watching Westworld, man.
Oh, I've heard that's good.
You haven't watched Westworld?
No, no, I'm catching up a few shows at a time. I'm watching Peaky Blinders, then it's The Americans, then it's Westworld. That's my order.
I recommend to order switch up there.
I'm already in the middle of Peaky Blinders.
Okay, well then over the Americans, I haven't watched that, so you can do whatever you want. Westworld's good. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, fair enough.
It is the Golden State Warriors of current television shows.
And currently, the Golden State Warriors are smashing the game's over. I take it back. The Warriors beat the Cavs 122-103 on Sunday night. We're recording this just after the game ends, and man,
a real vibe of a regular season game.
I'm going to be straight up. I was writing something while the first half was going on, and then we were here in Cumulus Studios during the second half, and it felt regular season-y in that Steph Curry was just throwing up shit that I don't think he would ever throw up during.
Yeah, I guess that was regular season. That was just awesome, but it was kind of like slower. Game one was so much energy in every play, and it just kind of started with LeBron in. Obviously, he was just like locked in, and that forced Golden State to need to punch back. And this game, LeBron kind of took that other role of, hey, I'm gonna kind of start off as a distributor and work through other ways, and it just kind of kept it like chill the whole time. And that's not enough. Turns out he needs to score 50 points to lose by less.
And, oh, God, 44, 9, and 12 final line. Or no, that's not right. 29, 9, and 12 in 44 minutes. I'm reading a Google box score. I've never done that before. Okay, so before we go any further, I should probably throw a pretty heavy bomb that I wasn't expecting to throw when I started at zone coverage in September. After a lot of thought and consideration, I've decided to call it. I'm not going to say a career. That's making it too big. But I'm not renewing my contract with zone coverage, which will mean that my writing at zone coverage will be done at the end of the NBA Finals. That also means Wolves Wired will be no more, which is a bummer. But I just wanted to throw that out here on the podcast. I'm returning to A Wolf Among Wolves, where there's sort of an explanation for my bouncing, my leave in zone coverage. It's obviously all on good terms, so thanks to Tom for the opportunity. Dane, obviously, you've been there through the entire process or most of the process, and couldn't have done it without either of you. David Naylor, the whole squad, Sam Extra, Brandon Warren, et cetera, et cetera. I could go down the line, but wanted to throw that out there, and it was a tough choice, but it's a choice I decided to make.
It's a tricky industry, and I mean, it's something that you and I talk about often. I mean, we're blessed to be able to be working in sports and talking about sports. I know for you and for me, it's something we've wanted to do since we were kids.
Yep.
But this world is constantly evolving in the way that we consume our news, and that puts like restraints on journalists like us and the ability to work. And while it's great, it pushes you in weird ways. I mean, one example being that it's 9:45 p.m. and we are on a Sunday night, and we're here, which again is something I know that you and I both like to do. But it's just a tricky industry, and I guess I mean I'll go on record of just saying how good of a person you've been to me, Tim, and welcoming me in. We didn't know each other well, and I felt like pretty immediately became partners, and I think we did some cool things here this season, and I mean the Timberwolves. The Timberwolves are something that's important to you and to me, and that comes through in your work, that you love this team, and you will continue to do that in a different space. But I was just glad to have somebody that to kind of share that passion with this season, and we did a lot of cool things. Traveled around the country a little bit, particularly Houston was sweet, covering a playoff team. I mean, you and I have loved the Timberwolves since we were kids. We suffered through the playoff drought, and then to be there together for all those games was sweet, and we kind of grew up with this team.
We did, and I appreciate that. But
you're not dying.
Wolves Wired will be no more, but I'm not going to be writing at zone coverage. I'll still contribute as often as I can. And Dane, you're still going to be around at zone coverage.
Mm-hmm. I will be starting my own podcast.
There will be a podcast, a Dane Moore podcast. I don't know what it's going to be called.
It is going to be called the Dane Moore NBA podcast.
Is that it?
It is.
We want more Dane Moore.
We could call it that too.
Well, yeah. Appreciate it.
And
anyway,
Tim will be on that show, of course, and we will continue to.
I don't know. Maybe we'll see. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, of course. Of course, I'll be on at some point.
It's like,
yeah. No, I'm going to pretend that there are really bad terms between you. Let's start a Twitter beef. I'm going to get burner accounts. Oh God, we should talk about that at some point.
Yeah, we should.
Okay. Backtracking.
Throw Tim some love on Twitter. He's been nothing but good stuff, and you have been able to follow him on Twitter for years and read his stuff for free, and he put a lot of work into that. So thank him.
Yeah, thank me. No, I appreciate it. Let's talk quickly about the finals. We touched on it a little bit. I don't know. What are your thoughts after the first couple games? It felt to me, and I think it's kind of the consensus, is like after. I'm not even going to count the J.R. Smith mental block because there was so much crap that happened before that play in Game 1 that I think was the main reason that the Cavs lost that game. His name is mainly Jordan Clarkson. I think you threw that out there too. But God, LeBron throwing up a 50 spot and still losing. What is there a way to beat this team? Essentially,
I mean, I was just and think about that tonight in Game 2. Also, it's just. They need, if they're going to run all the way through LeBron, they just need to have better shooters around him. And I think that's what we saw from the Cleveland team a year ago. It's not that those looks weren't it's not that they weren't getting good looks in Game 1 or in Game 2 from 3. They just don't really have high-level shooters surrounding them. I mean, when it's Jeff Green who's out there, and Kevin Love, since he hurt his wrist, hasn't really been the same shooter either. JR was obviously off, and then you start rolling out guys like Jordan Clarkson, and it's just I don't think it's the offense can't work with LeBron being that juggernaut. But sometimes he needs to pass to open 3-point shooters.
Yeah,
and they need to be able to knock it down, and
he clearly
they didn't do that.
Trust him. I don't know. This is kind of an outlier because of just how goofy his career has been, and I don't really know how to describe his game because he's a guy that I loved as recently as the trade deadline. But Rodney Hood is shooting 13% from 3 over the playoffs, and I don't know. There's guys that in theory should be good 3-point shooters for LeBron to throw out to, but when I look up and down the roster at those guys, none of them are really performing that well. When Kevin Love is your other guy, your number 2, I think that's okay when LeBron is as good as he is. Sure. But then after that, the drop is so extreme as far as guys that can fill in those spots and sit in the corner and wait for an open 3. They're just, I don't know, the ones that should be able to do it aren't good enough to do that in that role, or just straight up aren't doing it.
Well, and even Kyle Korver, who we think of as a dead eye shooter, that hasn't been working because that is a player that they're saying, okay, well, we're not going to let Korver be the one who beats us from 3.
It's essentially like hover LeBron, but don't let Korver beat you, right?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
And they don't have enough, and it's a bummer just for the NBA final. It would have been so fun to win that Game 1, Yep. And then we can at least talk ourselves into 5 or 6 or 7 games in the series. But you probably get a kick out of this. I was going back and looking at some previous NBA finals, and I looked. I was trying to think of a finals to compare this Cavs team to, and this with just LeBron as the dude, and I was like, man, the AI Sixers who made it that one year in 2001,
yeah,
where it was kind of like the same thing, right? It was just this AI is going to break down everyone in ISO. They just have they have some bit role players around them, and it's basically you're all in on AI. And so I went back and looked at game 1 of the 2001 finals.
And they won, right? Yeah.
They won that game.
That was the one where he stepped over Tyronn Lue.
Oh, I know.
Oh, my God.
And AI had 48 points in that game. And I was like, this is exactly like the vibe. So if, maybe it would have been the same thing if J.R. Smith would have just shot a layup after he got the rebound. But yeah, I don't know. I was just thinking about that. And we also remember that series as being one of the most lopsided finals of the past kind of 20 years. So I think it had a shot at being the 2001 finals with the Sixers, which went 5 games. And now I think we're destined for it to be the 2007 finals, where it was the Cavs just getting swept by the Spurs.
That's just a bummer. And I don't know. This isn't an original opinion, but I would really love for the NBA to just adopt the WNBA's playoff format. I'm really to that point. I don't think that there's any reason for LeBron, A, to have to go through the East every year, and B, for the Rockets to be stuck playing the Warriors in the Western Conference Finals when they're clearly the second best team. How much better of a finals would it have been if those were the two teams?
Totally. What are the counterpoint? What are the counter arguments of that? Just like nostalgia of this is how we've always done it. I don't know what the other things are.
Is there a geography component to it? Like if an East Coast team and a West Coast team play each other back and forth for a first-round series, is that a problem for the NBA travel-wise? But I don't know. That's the only thing I can think of. Yeah,
it's pretty much only every other day once we get to the latter games of the series, though.
Yeah, I mean, have nothing.
Travel is... I know it's not fun to travel across the country, but it's also 2018, and they're on private jets, and you could... It's not the end of the world. I'm with you. It's crazy. It's been this way for so long. Really, even from a Wolves perspective, again, I remember being a little kid and literally going to the library and pulling up the standings on NBA.com and being like, why the heck are the Wolves the 4 seed in the West? They have the 5th best record in the whole NBA. And there's always been, maybe not always, but certainly now for an extended period of time, there's just been this tilt that in one way or the other just kind of throws off the competitive balance of the league some. And it's not good for the Wolves going forward, because they're going to be, for the next couple of years at least, be well behind the Warriors and the Rockets.
Yep. And I kind of wrote about that, and we'll touch on that in a second, but I just want to pull up the conference standings, or the league standings rather, from this past year, just for reference, so I'm going to stay on this rabbit hole like I'm Jeff Van Gundy or something for a second. So the Wolves were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. They had the 13th best record in the league this year, which out of 16 teams, that would have put them against the 13. Who does the 13? The 4th seed.
Yeah.
So they would have played Boston in the first round. With a healthy Jimmy Butler and with all the injuries that Boston had, I would have picked Boston probably to win that series, but that's a way more interesting series than playing against Houston in the first round. And I think that's more interesting for NBA fans too. I don't know. I would love to see something like that happen. I don't necessarily see it happening, but I guess I'm glad Adam Silver's the commissioner, because that always leaves the door open, right? I saw some report about how challenge flags might be experimented with in the summer league this year. Fun fact.
I didn't see that.
Anyway.
That's one more thing, is the officiating, because I have a opinion on that. What did you leave that game with? And it's not an isolated incident to game 1. The officiating has been under heavy scrutiny throughout the playoffs. And what do you attribute that to? Is it worse? Why is this light so much brighter and flashing red on NBA's officiating in this playoffs?
I don't know. I'll start by saying I've seen more people, I won't say whether it's through Twitter or something else, because it's almost exclusively Twitter. I've seen more people throw out conspiracy theories about the officiating during this set of playoffs than any other that I can remember in recent memory. I don't think anything's changed in that regard. And honestly, I don't have a very good answer to that question, because I haven't researched the nuance of it too well. I do know that Kevin Arnovitz wrote something about sort of inside the referees huddle recently, and it got rave reviews, and I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, I did. It's just basically saying that they're doing everything they can,
which is what I assume is the case all the time. Like I know that I think it was a LeBron charge or whatever that went under heavy scrutiny.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think to be that offended by them overturning the call, for me personally, for just using that isolated incident, I don't know how you can be that enraged over that call being overturned. Like a play like that is so 50-50. I don't know. I give the officials the benefit of the doubt every time.
Right. And it's just some of the logistics of it that are the issue there. It's that they had the opportunity to review it because they said they weren't sure if he was in the restricted area or not.
Right. But you have the option to then overturn the call altogether once you're reviewing it.
Exactly, which is maybe that's, and maybe that's not a good rule to have in place, but that doesn't necessarily make the official making a bad call in the game. They're just operating by the letter of the law in that situation.
That's very much like a don't hate the player, hit the game kind of thing, isn't it? I mean, like they're following the rules to a T. It's just like if they see something they screwed up on, even if it's not why they initially went to review the play, they got to fix it, right?
And I think they did in that situation.
I do too.
I umpired high school baseball as my college job throughout college, and
I did a way more boring college job.
It really made me realize that literally the officials don't care at all about the game. Like, I was umpiring the game. I don't know who Billy is or Johnny's dad in the stands or the coach. Like, you're just there and you just want the game to end. And you don't want anything to pop up or go poorly. It's just, you just want to be invisible the whole time. And I don't know if in the NBA, we're putting so much more light on the referees that make them not be invisible.
Right.
Whether that be the whole review process, whether it be Steve Javie coming up and giving his opinion, we're making them not be invisible, which it's an imperfect science. So then once we put the microscope over the things that they miss, it's going to kind of lead to this like propaganda of this officiating's terrible. And I think that the case is it's probably actually improved over the past 20 years.
Yes.
We just have this minutia and these different variables that are making it stick out more. I told you this story before. I talked to Zach Zarba when I was covering the Wolves game in Milwaukee, and I asked him who Zach Zarba is, like the dark-skinned, black-haired guy. Like
he's a highly regarded official.
Yeah, and it was just interesting. So I was like, okay, but sitting there talking to him, I was like, so what do you think about Thibodeau? And he's like, honestly, I don't mind Thibodeau at all because I know what I'm going to get the whole time. It's like consistent. And so when they know the variables, it's like easier. But then when you have a coach who's very like volatile, who's normally chill, but then starts freaking out, that puts more of a light on the officials than the coach like Tibbs, who's just constantly like up high at that level. I don't know. I found that interesting, and it seemed like he was coming from a sincere place. He's like, those are the difficult things, is when when people who are normally chill start making a scene. That's kind of what makes the referees stick out more.
So just going back to officiating and the nature of their reputation right now. Like if you're one of those people that doesn't like the officiating or has a strong opinion about the way they've officiated this postseason in a negative way, and are maybe starting to draw up some conspiracy theories in your mind. And again, I've seen them a few times. Just like imagine being an official, because nobody has like a favorite official unless you're like beyond NBA nerd. Like the only person that I know that had a favorite official was Britt Robson. And I think it was Zach Zarba, actually. I can't remember for sure. But the only officials that people seem to know around here are like Ken Maurer and Ed Malloy and all these people that have negative reputations here, or Joey Crawford. Yeah. People like he clashed with Tim Duncan. No one knows about like unless you count like Dick Bavetta, who kind of like did races with Charles Barkley for charity and all this other stuff. Refs are either invisible or they're visible because they screwed up something. The most famous ref of all time in the NBA is Tim Donaghy.
Yeah.
So their job, like past it just being hard in principle and like making it up there means you're really good. It's really hard to, I would imagine, to do just unless you have really thick skin, because there's no avenue where you're going to get applauded for your officiating to the casual fan. So I commend them no matter what has happened.
Me too, man. I just hope the people who are like lambasting these refs for that call at the end of that game in their Saturday morning pickup game.
Yeah.
I hope that their games are going swimmingly with they're not bickering with their friends about calls and stuff. And I doubt that's the case because rules in basketball are extremely difficult. It's such a subjective, tiny little thing. Like, what's a foul? What's not a foul? All of us have played basketball with our friends and just get into arguments about, did you break the rules or not? And then you have refs who are there to try and figure that out. I mean, maybe you and I would be harsher on them if we were like Cavs fans, but I just kind of believe in it a little bit more than it seems like a lot of other people do.
Like, yeah, I guess if you're like just a casual or even a diehard Cavs fan and that happens, you're justified to get upset. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. Like, I've seen games where the fans at the Target Center have been just booing mercilessly. Or, God, when we were in Houston, maybe it's just because Chris Paul plays on that team now, but the Rockets fans boo mercilessly. I've never been at a Wolves game where there have been some bad calls or iffy calls and thought, like, God, these guys suck. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I've just never been enraged by officiating.
Well, I mean, and maybe sometimes they have, like, a quote-unquote bad game.
Sure. All people do. Like, I remember one of the
you and
first,
I have bad days. Like,
one of the first podcasts we ever had with Dave Benz, he mentioned how he had one of his worst games he ever called on a broadcast before. Right. Everyone has bad days. It happens. Totally.
Well, I think that's enough of a refereeing rabbit hole.
Let's talk more about the playoffs from a piece that you wrote early this past week. And it ties into the team that we cover, which we've hardly talked about, the Timberwolves. And the general basis of the article, if I'm not mistaken, is the style of basketball that the Wolves play has reminded you in the way that teams like the Warriors and the Cavs have played in these playoffs. But I want you to elaborate on it because you actually wrote it.
Well, you and I have talked about this a lot, and I've wrote plenty of things this season about how I think the Tibbs style is, like, antiquated. Mm-hmm. And, like, maybe this was a flaw. Like, this should not have been the base offense, base defense that they were rolling with, which I think defensively that is we often hear people say icing, but it's like the dropping of the center, not switching on pick and rolls as kind of their base defense. And again, that's not what's happening in the playoffs. We see everybody switching everything. So I was like, okay, I'm pretty sure that's pretty old school Tibbs. And then we see all the isolation, obviously, with I kind of highlighted Jamal Crawford, Jeff Teague, Jimmy Butler, and Andrew Wiggins, and just how frequently they isolate. And it's kind of like, man, those things both seem really old school. And then watching these playoffs, I saw it today before on the broadcast. There was a Synergy Sports stat that said KD had shot in isolation 156 times in these playoffs, whereas in last season's whole playoffs it was 63.
Yep.
And
that's
I mean,
crazy.
It's just really the frequency of isolation has really shot up in these playoffs. Not even just in the finals, but I think in the past few rounds also. And that is a product of everyone switching. Because when you switch, you end up having mismatches. Even if it's a team like the Celtics, who have, quote, switchy guys, you still have somewhat of a mismatch. It's not the initial guy you wanted to.
Right.
So teams have been so patient in just being like, okay, now we have a mismatch or a semi-mismatch, and we're just going to isolate it with a guy like KD or LeBron. And I was like, that's kind of like what the Wolves do. On offense, I mean, super generally, when they're not going through Cat, it's like, all right, find Butler, find Wiggins, find Crawford, find Teague, kind of towards the end of the shot clock, and then it's an isolation. The issue with the Wolves is their isolations have usually not found a mismatch. It's, oh, crap, the shot clock's kind of winding down. One of these four isolation options are pretty good. Let's go to them. And what I think the Wolves could do better next season is getting I don't think having an isolation base offense is necessarily a bad thing, so long as you're targeting mismatches through that.
Yeah.
And one major thing I think is Jeff Teague bringing the ball up the court faster, so there's more time there, more time to work with. The Wolves shot the second most shots in the league with under 4 seconds left on the shot clock. that's a red flag. I mean,
Yeah.
that shouldn't be happening. The team that shot the most was the Memphis Grizzlies, who are obviously one of the worst teams in the league.
That's not a team you want to compare yourself to. Yeah.
So I was just get up into the offense quicker, and then you have more time to prod for that isolation that you want. And I really think that that's a reasonable thing. I've shifted a little bit off of my, island of thinking that the Wolves really needed to move to more of a ball movement type offense. Maybe it's okay if they rely on some of these isolation players, so long as it's in like high leverage situations where they have a mismatch.
Yeah. So I got a couple things on this. One, I like the idea of Teague bringing the ball up more quickly, and two, I've talked about this. I've ran this point home more than I probably need to, but in Atlanta, when Jeff Teague would bring the ball up, he'd throw it off to somebody immediately, and then ball motion would start. I'm not saying that they need to play the way that the Hawks did in Minnesota, but I'm very pro Teague bringing the ball up the floor, and the second he crosses half court, handing it off to Butler, Wiggins, or Towns.
And even get it back, but just get it going,
just
right?
Get the ball moving.
Yeah.
I think that's one awesome concept. But the other thing, at least as it relates to Golden State and to Houston and the way that they run isolations, and probably the issue that the Wolves are going to run into is even if you do that first thing I mentioned and then you're running isos for Wiggins or Butler, if that breaks down, how many options do you have outside the pass? Like we've ripped apart this whole Rockets isolation system where Chris Paul and James Harden have all these guys that are ordered to jack up threes the second that they're throwing the ball out and they have a few inches of space.
Right.
The Warriors are the Warriors. If Steph Curry drives, he's got Klay Thompson, Kevin Durant, and Draymond Green outside on the perimeter waiting for him. And if they collapse, then if all the defenders stay, then they have a big guy inside to throw it up to.
Right.
Or that's interchangeable with the Warriors. The Wolves just don't have that option with the exception of Cat, really, as far as reliable shooters go.
Yeah, and he's often not in a situation to be like a catch and shoot type of player because he's the team's functioning as the power forward or center on offense. It's like really those situations to find Towns for a three have often been in like the pick and pop type of situation, right?
Right.
And yeah, it would be interesting to see how much better the offense gets specifically in isolation if the players were surrounded by shooters. Andrew Wiggins was awful in isolation this season. He scored 0.67 points per possession in isolation, which puts him in the 18th percentile of the league, yet he shot the 33rd most shots in isolation. But if Andrew Wiggins is surrounded by shooters, or a shooter, another guy out there, that would be obviously super helpful. And Teague and Butler are already isolating at a really high rate. Teague's 0.98 and Butler's 0.93, which is like the top third of the league, both of them. In theory, another shooter would really boost them up. So I know that's not any breaking news. Wolves need a shooter, but that's like a specific example of how having a shooter could help this isolation team. I mean, honestly, look at what the playoffs are. Look at what the Cavs are that we were just talking about. You can only do so much with an elite isolator if they're surrounded by other offensive weapons who aren't knocked down three-point shooting guys.
And if we want to do a direct comparison between the Wolves and the Cavs as it pertains to beating the Warriors, which is essentially what I wrote about, let's say you're comparing the two of them, and LeBron, if LeBron and Jimmy are your comparison tools, and then I'll take Karl Anthony Towns over Kevin Love right now without any questions asked, but the only reason that the Cavs were in this game one and made it a game in the second half in game two are because LeBron is LeBron. And Jimmy Butler, as great as he is not LeBron. Yeah. Defensively, they're pretty equally awful. I mean, just breaking it down in a really sort of base, simplistic way, the Wolves play in a similar style to the Cavs in that their two best players are your center and your sort of wing creator, and there are some nice pieces kind of surrounding them that either underachieved or just weren't there, or sort of a mixed bag. But man, there's no way that this current team can beat Golden State, and I wrote about it. It's going to take something short of a miracle, essentially, for them to eventually compete. Cat's going to have to take a huge leap. Wiggins is going to have to not be the Jeff Green of the Cavs, essentially, and turn into a third star. And like the one big thought exercise that I wrote about, and we've talked about it on the pod, it's kind of what inspired me to think about it further, was replacing Jamal Crawford. I mean, statistically makes a huge difference if they bring in a Marcus Smart or an Avery Bradley or someone, even a average defender. I'm talking those two guys are major plus defenders. An average defender could improve this team's defense. But even that, in that scenario, like how much better are they going to be defensively? If they improve 13 spots defensively and stay in the top 5 in offense, is that a team that can beat the Warriors? I don't think so. Yeah. I think it can get you to the second round, maybe the conference finals. But then I think you're losing in 5 or 6 to Golden State. So they need to find a way to figure that out. And it's kind of my glass half empty take, but I just don't see a route for it right now.
But so is it smart to take that path of, pursuing another veteran or two wing defender that will help improve the defense up to 15th, maybe 12th in the league or something like that, like an above average defense? Does that make sense to invest the assets you have, the mid-level exception, or making moves? Does it make sense to pursue an Avery Bradley, who would obviously be a better defender than Jamal Crawford? In a way that really makes sense, because you're like, oh, this was a need. Defense, particularly on-ball defense. That would be a need. But at the same time, you're like, all right, shouldn't we maybe just be trying to build for 3-4 years down the road? Because even if it's the sad reality for not just the Timberwolves, but the whole NBA is, it feels like even if you nail the offseason and you nail the coaching and you're just on point for the next couple of years, odds are still very much against you that you're going to be able to compete with this Warriors team.
Exactly. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I don't know. So it's is that what you would want to do?
I mean, I don't think that 3-4 years down the road should stop you from trying to be as good as you can be with this current group, because the fact of the matter is, a team with a core of Karl Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins is guaranteed for the next 4 years, and probably Jimmy Butler. So if that's the case and you're constricted financially and you can improve 10 spots statistically, which I don't totally buy, which I should, I made mention in the article.
But maybe with theory, other internal development.
Right. In theory, if Avery Bradley moves you up 12 spots in defensive rating, I think it's a no-brainer to go after a guy like that and continue to at least give off the appearance that the team is improving. If they hit a wall and that wall is Golden State, I mean, so be it for now, because whether or not you sign an Avery Bradley type, you're still going to have Wiggins, Towns, and Butler, so you might as well make the best of it in that time being.
They're on by trading for Butler and signing Teague and Gibson, they chose to take we're going to take a couple small steps a year path.
Yeah.
And I don't know, jury's out if that was the right strategy or not. Maybe the better thing to do would be to really to roll with the slow play of Karl Towns, Wiggins, and Zach LaVine and stay a little bit worse so as to get better in 2020.
Sure.
But we're on this path now, which is the year-over-year, hopefully improving 2-3 wins and eventually intersecting with the Warriors when maybe they're starting to downturn and turn 32 years old, all their kind of core does, and then maybe that's when you hit them. But as you put in the article, it seems like so much would need to go right in the Minnesota sense, because this Wolves team's now getting older too.
Yeah, exactly.
Outside of Towns and Wiggins, but yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say what to do with that mid-level exception, because
I mean, I'll ask this question: if a wing defender, let's say Avery Bradley is the standard or the ideal for the mid-level exception, he might not be. Somebody might hate him because he had a down year, all things considered.
But you can throw in your name, throw Kentavious Caldwell Pope, similar like
those types of play. If that's not the type of guy you're going for, who would it be?
Yeah, right. That's why I guess what I'm saying is I kind of like the idea of Kentavious Caldwell Pope, who fits in a timeline with Wiggins and Towns more so than going after a 28, 29, 30, 31.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Or like another one is like Bellinelli or something like that. That's even beyond the timeline of Butler. I just think the player you go get, what they should be doing, their skills should enhance Wiggins and Towns either this season or for the future, rather than Butler or Gibson or Teague. And it doesn't seem like that's what's been going on with the management. Obviously, in bringing in Derrick Rose is a Butler Teague who's Gibson guy
who could be brought back for the mid-level exception.
Yeah, and then this whole conversation's void.
Which, I mean, I liked Rose, and I think he's earned his way back if that's what Tom Thibodeau decides to do. But if that takes away money from the mid-level exception and halts them from being able to get a guy like Caldwell Pope, Bradley, probably not smart because I think he's restricted. But, I mean, guys like that would be a major bummer.
I guess I kind of feel like you want to get a 3-and-D wing guy with this mid-level exception, which, to clarify, is about like $8.6 million is what the Wolves have to work with there.
And as you've mentioned, the way that contracts have been tossed around, huge contracts have been tossed around, nobody has money. So those guys that maybe 2 years ago, if they were free agents, would have gotten more money, they're just not going to now. So the mid-level might be attracted this summer.
I really think so. But I want it to be a young guy like KCP if he falls underneath that line, or like a Rodney Hood who's also 24. Who I'm sure everyone's like really, really down on after
there's
these playoffs.
There's a shooter for you.
But
Jordan Clarkson. Just kidding.
He's still under contract. There's just guys out there. Get it. Let's draw the line at 25. Bring in a guy under 25. That's just
my whole thing with the mid-level is I don't see that contract as a long-term piece. I see the mid-level as a piece, a complimentary piece. I don't think age doesn't matter for me with the mid-level exception.
And it can be. You're right. Like but PJ Tucker signed a 4-year mid-level exception deal. Right. Like what ended up being about like 4 years, $36 million. But most of the time, it's like a 1-year deal. Like Rudy Gay signed this past season a 1-year, $8.5 million deal.
Yeah, and even if it was a 3-year deal for a 28-year-old, I'm okay with that as long as it's somebody that I can rely on, which may not be Avery Bradley, who I've mentioned that name more than I've mentioned most Timberwolves players the past few weeks.
That would be the safer option. It's just I'm kind of like we know we need something more. Roll the dice on someone who could turn into something like, oh man, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope turned into like a all NBA defensive second team type player, and he's able to get like 15 a game. Like I would. Even if that's not the most likely thing, I think it's possible.
It's more possible, at least. And that was the whole ending, the glass half full part of my piece was not so much the potential signing, but if there is a team that could eventually become a team that could compete with Golden State, there are essentially none outside of Houston right now. But if there is another team that could do it, like if you just look up and down the East and the West, the only teams I can think of maybe down the road are Boston, who is probably the next most likely. And then after that, unless something magical happens with Anthony Davis in New Orleans, I think it's Minnesota because, I mean, Jimmy Butler is Jimmy Butler. Andrew Wiggins.
What about Philly?
Philly. Sorry. Philly. Totally forgot about Philly. That's a good one, too, especially after they get LeBron this summer.
And get rid of Colangelo.
Oh, my God. And then he can.
What a weird world we live in.
Zone Coverage can hire him as a social media expert. Oh, good. But man, I don't know. Minnesota, I think there's a path for them. I guess it's a very unlikely path. Karl Anthony Towns is already incredible, but he's still incredibly young, and I think he's going to get a lot better. Right. And even if that doesn't mean Anthony Davis level defense, if that means like, I don't know, being a plus defender and then the best offensive center in the NBA, if that's your main guy and Jimmy Butler is your number 2, there's a path for a team with those two to compete with Golden State if everything else goes right. But Wiggins is the key, and we've beaten this into the ground, but the glass half empty side of this again is a KCP or an Avery Bradley or whatever have you. If Wiggins is being like the Wiggins that drives everybody crazy, and this isn't a good look for financial reasons, that mid-level guy can come in and finish a game. Yeah. And it's probably a more reliable option in terms of fit, in terms of just system, things like that.
A couple times with Crawford last year.
Right, but then if in an ideal world, you got a guy that isn't a minus defender like Crawford that's finishing the game too. So,
you know what I was thinking about?
A lot of scenarios, man.
With the playoffs, and you're bringing up how Towns is one of the best big men in the league. But, watching the conference finals in both of them and now the NBA finals, how many post-ups have we seen?
Yeah.
Like Kevin Love, that's basically it, right? I mean, Clint Capella's getting like lobs and stuff, but you're not just like never. I mean, yes, LeBron, and you'll get LeBron bully ball a little bit.
How much was AD posting up?
I mean, he was, but I'm just focused on the Final Four.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, I mean,
but AD would. You're right. He would if they were there.
The comeback I'd have to that is just like there are no really, really good big men in the Final Four, except for Al Horford, who's as good as he is.
He was bad.
A, he was awful, and B, even him at his best, he's not like getting the ball down in the block. He's like the ultimate all-star glue guy, essentially. I mean, he's not a guy getting the ball in the post. He didn't have Davis. Obviously, he didn't have Cousins. He didn't have Towns. He didn't have even like a Jokic, who's a great post player. None of the really good post players were in the Final Four, which I guess you could make the argument that, I mean, just basketball's going away from that. I mean, that's kind of an age-old topic, but
the Sixers didn't with Embiid, and it didn't work.
Right. Yeah.
It can just be. It would just look very different than the playoffs that we've been watching, and I don't think that means that. I would love to see the Wolves get more post touches for Towns. It's going to be interesting. Say that's 2 or 3 years in the future when the Wolves are in the conference finals.
Yep.
And you've just been kind of going through the playoffs, and you've been going against all these teams that are just kind of playing pick and roll, and all their centers really do is catch lobs and dunks. And then you have the Wolves, who is like, all right, get on the block, Carl. It's just different. The NBA the Wolves are in a really interesting position to have their future of their franchise and hands down best offensive player be a post. And do
you think that needs to be the case long term? I don't think he needs to be post the way that he was used necessarily.
Oh, I would love to see him in more ball screen, but that kind of goes back to what I was writing is the Wolves are also not they're playing such an isolation style that they aren't looking really to involve Towns as much in a traditional rolling type of sense. And also the reality is like Towns isn't as good of just a rim roller as Anthony Davis or Clint Capella.
Sure.
Like he's not somebody you're like, all right, pick, roll, I'm gonna throw it up to like 14 feet in the air, you're gonna catch it and dunk it. That is he's a great offensive player. That's not one of his strongest.
I would love to go back and look at. I don't think that there are numbers unless Synergy has them. When he sets a screen, I would bet a fair amount of money that a huge percentage of his movement off of screens are pops and not rolls.
Totally.
He goes and just stands on the side. And even if we go back and talk about the Houston series, that first round series, do you remember the first couple games or even the first game? Yeah. They were getting switches, and Jeff Teague was taking it to the hole. Yeah. I mean, Jeff Teague was saying we got to get the ball to Towns because he's got Chris Paul on him, but they weren't using that at all.
No, and that wasn't even limited to the playoffs. It's never really been a thing. And I don't know. It'd be an interesting question for Tibbs, and I don't know how honest of an answer that would be, but in ways it also makes sense to have him pop because, you have a 42% 3-point shooter catching the ball there who can also go to the basket from there too. But if there is a weakness in his game compared to other centers, he's not the skyscraper who's going to like DeAndre Jordan catch an oop and dunk it. That's not something we've seen a ton of from Towns over. I don't know. Yeah, but I guess just bigger picture, it will be interesting when Karl Anthony Towns is eventually in a conference finals and getting 20 to 25 shots a game because at least, 10 of those are going to be straight post-ups probably, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what his game is.
And he's good at it. He's a really good post player. And for all the knocking that we might be able to do on the use of Towns, I think Tom Thibodeau could very easily throw up that graphic with all the numbers and then throw up that graphic with Larry Bird right next to him and all the numbers and how they're the only two to do X, Y, and Z in the same year. So, I mean, there's room for criticism. There's no question because did he take the third most shots on the team this year?
Yeah, third.
That's ridiculous. But at the same time, he was unreal levels of efficient this year in the times that he did shoot.
But again, pick up the pace a little bit.
Yep.
You have more time to find him in those situations. I thought it was really interesting when I was looking at the teams with pace. The team that led the NBA in pace was the New Orleans Pelicans, who half the season have Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins, who are again big men, posting up very often. And so it was an intentional thing by Alvin Gentry to say, all right, we got to get into our sets quick because it takes longer to run an offense where you're going through post touches. So what he did in practices was they cut the shot clock down to 18 seconds, and they cut their half court rule, getting the ball past half court, to 6 seconds. Otherwise, it was a turnover. And it's just like enforcing those little things that, if that had been in place in Minnesota the whole year, that changes some habits for Jeff Teague. Okay, Jeff Teague, get the ball past half court in 4 seconds rather than 6 seconds. And that's 2 more seconds to work with. And they're getting the ball moving. It would be so helpful for the Wolves to cut down those shots and to cut down the quantity of shots they're taking in the last 4 seconds. Again, with Crawford, how many of everyone's mind, it's like, whenever the bench was in, okay, 5 seconds left on the shot clock. Someone get it to Jamal. Crossover, 16-footer. Like,
yeah, and the thing that drove me, I think, crazier than anything else offensively with Jamal, I mean, we talked about needing shooters in the corners and everywhere else when a star player was driving. I can't count the number of times Jamal, for whatever reason, would be out by like the logo by half court, just waiting to restart the offense and chuck up a three, when in reality he was the best 3-point shooter, at least the one I probably relied on the most off the bench, and I'm including Belly and Tyus in that group. Like, I just trusted Jamal with an open three more than anybody off the bench, and
he just never proved to be an open three shooter, though. He was just always like a bang bang, like crossing people up before shots, and they needed him to be a catch and shoot
when he was in the corner open, I feel like he made more open threes than anyone else off the bench this year. So, but the way he played, he was just never there. The times he was open in the corner was so rare. Yeah, it was frustrating because I felt like he made it more often than not.
Sounds like another good reason to get KCP.
Yeah, there we go. Can he leave the state of California yet?
I don't know. I was going to bring that up.
Oh, man. So we're at 46 minutes. What else do we got to talk about?
I mean, I thought it was crazy that if the playoffs go 7 games, or the finals go 7 games, that goes to June 17th.
Yeah,
I know. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, you're serious? No.
And then the draft is on June 21st.
Yeah.
Like, the NBA doesn't stop. It goes. Then you have the draft, and then free agency starts on July 1st, which is another 9 days.
The summer league is 6 days later.
The free agency moratorium ends on the 6th, and that's the same day that summer league starts. Yeah, it's just.
Oh my God.
Yeah, the NBA doesn't stop, which is just kind of sweet. It's always there for you if you want it, but if you want to take a little respite from the Timberwolves and the NBA too, like that's also cool. But they've become king of just stretching out the NBA forever. With
the exception of soccer, I think basketball is better than any other sport at not stopping at all.
So what's soccer like? I don't even know. It just kind of constantly goes.
What's soccer? You kick the ball. It's called football. No, so they're just better at
played that in gym class.
Played it at recess. Soccer's good because internationally they've marketed that so well that this summer's the World Cup, which any person knows how big the World Cup is, but the year after that it'll be like the Copa Americas, and then the year after that, and this is all in the summer.
So there's always in the off season
it'll be
something.
It'll be the Euros, and then so there's all of that for basketball, but I mean, nobody really cares about the Euros for basketball unless you're a diehard fan. I'll watch them. I want to get my Alexei Shved fix or whatever. But soccer is way better about it. The thing about basketball is, like you said, if you're an NBA diehard or just a basketball diehard, you get your draft right after the finals. You get your summer league right after that. And there's free agency and trade talks and Woj bombs and all of that.
That's a little bit of a diversity, too. And the different types of things.
And if you have bad taste and love basketball, you have the big three to watch, too. I mean, there's just a ton of options. And
totally.
Soccer's just different.
Yeah. I do think that free agency is almost like a different... It's almost like a different set of people who are into that free agency.
True.
I wonder how many people who are going to be tirelessly refreshing their phone on July 1st for Woj bombs are people who are even watching this NBA Finals game tonight. For example.
That's a good question.
There's, and whatever, it's their prerogative to each their own. I do think it's really interesting how there's some people who are so obsessive with roster construction in the NBA and love having these like theoretical conversations like, oh, should the Blazers bring back Yusuf Nurkic or should they roll with Zach Collins at center? And like, how are they going to deal with this restricted free agency? Like, they love that conversation. But they're like, game 2 of the NBA Finals. Nah. Like,
honestly,
yeah.
I'm I wrote, again, this is something I mentioned at the beginning of my last article about the Wolves. There's some people that are very big on who's going to win the title.
Like that, yeah.
And then there's some people that are very big on, and Matt Moore mentioned this on Twitter, and I think I'm with him. Some people are just really into like what happens during the regular season to get to the point of inevitability with the Warriors and the Cavs or whatever. I'm sort of like that, and I think and it's probably just a byproduct of watching the Timberwolves so closely for so many years. You stop really caring who gets to the finals. But I think the offseason is the beginning of that. So,
sure.
Like when, God, it's so much fun too, especially if you're on the internet a lot and just tweeting. And if you're like a Patrick Fenelon or something like that, like all that stuff with DeAndre Jordan getting like locked in with Doc Rivers and Blake Griffin, or
the Colangelo stuff. I mean, obviously,
oh my God, like all that stuff is crazy, and it just gets amplified in the offseason because NBA Twitter is insane. So when all that stuff was going on, like it's really fun to follow. And I don't follow any other sports, not even remotely as closely as I do the NBA, obviously, but I can't imagine that MLB free agency is anything like this for the diehard.
It's just easier to kind of like understand what roster construction looks like in the NBA. The CBA, that's very difficult.
It's complicated.
But you can be like, all right, our team's got 3 wings, but we have no rebounding or shot blocking presence, so you can go on to Spotrac or whatever and pull up who the free agents are and look at that, and you can kind of have that. I mean, I do that with like my friend, like go out and get beers and like what would be, who are the wings that the Wolves could go out and sign this this summer. And those are easy kind of fun conversations to have. But when you're talking about football, where you're talking about baseball, where there's so many more players, the impact of one free agent signing, particularly for like the equivalent of the mid-level exception, isn't as meaningful. It's like your long reliever or like your fourth outfielder. Like, yeah, that matters. I get that like matters, but this is it's different. It's different in the NBA, and I think that's what's made me fall more in love with the NBA rather than baseball. Which like I played baseball and basketball growing up, and I've definitely obviously gravitated more towards basketball than baseball. And I think it's because of NBA Twitter and NBA roster construction is just fun.
Yeah, it's a ton of fun. I honestly think this doesn't apply to you as much. I think the NBA 2K series helps with that too, because if you've ever played it and done like a franchise mode,
sure,
they have every CBA rule integrated into that game. So it's a lot easier to play GM in that sense because you're playing with it real time, and that's the nerdiest thing I've ever said on this podcast.
No, but I honestly think that
I'm on a podcast with Tom Schreier and David Naylor, so I don't feel as bad. Love you, Tom and Dave.
I think 2K has honestly been huge for the league, and as is House of Highlights and NBA Twitter. I mean, those factors have been. I don't want to say have been as important as having a LeBron and a Steph in the league that are just awesome basketball players, but that's why the NBA has become so great, is they found things outside of the game that loop you in as a fan to be really into. And they do it at a really high level. The House of Highlights are awesome, and they're funny, and they're cultured, and 2K is grown, and you can like really get to know players and what they actually look like, and you can seamlessly be a GM on there. I mean, we're kind of figuring this out, where it allows fanhood to grow very easily to be an NBA fan.
It's a very accessible league. Yeah, absolutely.
And progressive too. Like,
yes.
I mean, we haven't gone too much into like some of the NFL's policies and stuff with the national anthem and the flag and all of that, and I'm glad to work around a league that is.
Are they that progressive with that though?
I think much more so than.
I thought that they were encouraged to stand for the national anthem.
No. I'm saying the NFL isn't progressive. I'm saying the NBA
I'm
is.
saying in terms of that particular topic, I think they've been unfortunately less progressive than I'd like them to be.
The NBA?
Yeah.
Okay, I guess the NFL has just been really bad, and the NBA has just been like okay.
Yeah, no, that I 100% agree with.
Yeah.
I don't watch the NFL very often for several reasons, mostly because I think football's dumb. But anyway, watch the Andy Lucanary football machine in zone coverage. That's the main reason that it bothers me is that, it's just not progressive at all. And in almost every sense, I think the NBA is the opposite of that.
Yeah.
In terms of the national anthem specifically, I don't think the NBA has done as well as it could have.
That's fair. I think overall, and the players have taken to being a very progressive bunch and putting that out there where I don't know if it's just wearing a helmet in football makes you less noticeable and less of a personality than you are on a basketball court.
You could never wear an I Can't Breathe t-shirt in an NFL game.
Totally.
The entire, was it Miami Heat or Cavs? It was the team with LeBron.
Yeah.
I don't know. There were lots of teams that did it. So, go NBA.
And Tim, you're going to be back for another episode.
We've got one more Wolves Wired.
We'll have the whole bunch together.
With zone coverage, we'll have David and Tom back. We'll do it right. It might come out a day early. We'll figure that out. But we've got one more. So I won't get too sentimental at the end of this one, since we do have another one with the whole squad. But that's all I got. You got anything else?
No. Thanks for listening. Obviously, follow Tim on Twitter, as I'm sure you already do, and at A Wolf Among Wolves, and we will keep churning out Timberwolves content at Zone Coverage too. There's plenty of room on the internet for NBA and Timberwolves content. Actually, I believe that we need even more of it. I think there's not as many people writing about the Wolves these days. So I'm glad that while you aren't going to be doing this for your focused job anymore, that it's still something that you have a passion about to want to continue to write, and I think that's important.
Without getting too into it, because again, there's going to be a thing by the time this pod is up at A Wolf Among Wolves. The reason that I'm leaving is it's nothing other than the fact that writing about basketball every day made me less interested in basketball, which is the whole reason I got into it. And at that point, it was just a job. And I don't want to do this job if it means like losing the one thing I really like to do when I'm not working. Yeah, that's the whole bit. And it helped me gain a massive newfound respect for guys like John Krasinski and Jace Frederick and Jerry Zgoda and Kent Youngblood and all those full-time guys. And I mean, those people are incredible. And I mean, I can lump you right in there with them as far as work ethic goes. So, but again, I'm not going to get too sentimental because we're doing this again next week, and that's when we'll do that. So until then, for Dane Moore at Dane Moore NBA, I'm Tim Fakelis at TIMFAKLIS. This has been the second to last Wolves Wired. So we'll see you for the last one next week. Woo!